The interactive we call it interactive scene system. So basically it's a way, since we are in first person in this game, what it enables us is to create this feeling that the player is always immersed in the game, right? So it's all about making the player feel that he's continuously part of the story, of the gameplay. When he's shooting, where he's talking, we want the player to be like really in, right? So we do that by trying to seamlessly blend between gameplay and cinematics. And you saw parts of that in the demo, but having said that, there will be moments, like key narrative moments, where we'll be doing like a regular cutscene, which you saw in the demo probably, where you actually can, you know, see your character from third person and see, like, or even like during driving the car, you also have an option to switch between driving behind the wheel, seeing the cockpit, or actually putting the camera away and seeing the world this way. So I'm Maciej Pietras, I'm lead cinematic animator on Cyberpunk 2077. It's really all about creating a feeling that your choices matter as a player, and it's all about keeping that everything connected with first person.
Is it, when you're in a sort of conversation and you're choosing dialogue options, do you have set gestures programmed for each option, or is it slightly random?
No, no, like actually what we do is, at CD Projekt Red, is we are aiming to be everything being handcrafted. And when it comes to scenes, on how we actually do the scenes, it's actually a scene, right? Which is super complex in a way that we have to handle all the choices, but every single animation you see is created by us, by animators. Like, we're making a huge game set in a huge city, and you're gonna have a big scenes, you're gonna have a huge conversations. But what we're trying to do is to really to create this handcrafted feeling that you are always seeing what we try to do our best.
The results are handcrafted as well, so can you talk about how that's going to play out in Cyberpunk?
To be honest, it's all about choices and consequences, right? The CNC's, the famous phrase, is that when you present the player with a certain amount of choices, everyone wants to see what consequences are. In Cyberpunk 2077, the choices start right at the character creation screen, right? Right there, you're set up with choosing your gender, choosing your skin tone, choosing your background story. And all those choices throughout the game will combine and create, in different moments, different consequences. And when it comes to how we are going to approach the ending, I can safely tell you that we will have multiple endings. But when it comes to Cyberpunk 2077, you know, it's based on Cyberpunk 2020 pen and paper RPG, and setting your backstory is like really true to the bone RPG thing, right? You select your backstory, you define who your character is, and you own that character. This is you, this is your representation, and you're making those choices, sometimes, you know, moral gray choices, and those choices will have repercussions.
Was there anything that you thought that you could only uniquely do in a sci-fi setting?
Well, going from Witcher to Cyberpunk in those terms, I think, you know, we're basing our game on pen and paper RPG, right? This pen and paper RPG, Cyberpunk 2020, already has a set stone of certain elements like themes, but also abilities and skills. And while we use the Cyberpunk 2020 as an inspiration, but we are not afraid to do our tweaks when it comes to gameplay mechanics, when it comes to adjusting certain elements. And we do gameplay system mostly by ourselves, by CD Projekt Red team.
So there were high buildings in The Witcher, and so that sort of verticality might be one thing that was like you were previously unable to do.
Yeah, when you think about The Witcher, comparing Witcher and Cyberpunk, those two universes, I like to think about The Witcher that it was just vast landscapes, you know? It was a vast landscape, and you had to go for long distances to get to your path. And it was part of the Witcher lore to do this way. But in Cyberpunk, we're a night city. It creates this sense of verticality simply because there are levels. So when we compare those two games, in terms of the size, I think The Witcher was mostly horizontal, but Cyberpunk is going to be mostly vertical.
In The Witcher, it was like, one of the things I thought it did fantastically was, and part of this is down to the writing, which is you would sort of leave a town and just out of earshot, or just within earshot, would be all these things that pull your attention. And they would be quite dense. Like you would go like 10 meters and then there would be one really interesting thing, and because of the quality of the writing, it interests you and you want to go investigate. And that's when you have like one sort of horizontal plane to work with. So I'm wondering how you approach that when it's a massive city and there are multiple levels to all the buildings.
When you think about the verticality of it and how to make it like super interesting, for me personally, is the fact that everything in our game is handcrafted. We're not using any procedural systems to generate or populate the world, the levels, and thanks to that we're able to control the narrative, the storytelling elements that pull you in and interest you, and you find them interesting simply by, we're making a game. We know how to place it, where to make it really interesting, and we're really striving to really do that in Cyberpunk 2077 too.
How many first lines of dialogue do you think have been written to sort of pull someone in?
Man, I cannot say. What I can tell you is going to be huge.
With open worlds like this that have shooting in it, often I find that they can be sort of, as soon as you have an open world, you run the risk of being like a jack of all trades and a master of none. And when you have shooting like in an open world, obviously, lots of resources have gone to the world, and it's the shooting itself is never as refined as like a game that's dedicated to shooting. But sometimes games can sort of fix that by taking their shooting in a sort of different direction, something that hasn't been done before. I'm wondering if there was a particular direction that you wanted to take the gunplay, the combat, and also how much of a role combat plays overall.
Yeah, it's not about the style. I think the style is all about being visceral. Because when we created a combat system, we thought about making it, one, it has to be visceral, two, it has to be fluid. Meaning that we do not want to make players choose a class before that. We want to make the class system to be fluid, for the player to be able to choose the path of a cyberpunk of his own. So not only we have like gunplay and long-range weapons, and those are like smart weapons, tech weapons, and power weapons. But when it comes to the other options, we have stealth in the game. So stealth is also an option. We are not thinking about any concrete like a inspiration for that. We're really trying to find the best thing that fits with the cyberpunk lore, with the cyberpunk themes, to make the gameplay, as fluid and as pleasant as possible.
How many sort of play styles are you designing for?
Oh man, you have the three main classes, right? Which is the Techie, Netrunner, and Solo. Like all those classes are very different, but you're not limited as a player to pick and choose one class, and you can always mix them. So as soon as you start mixing, the possibilities are really, they're huge.
Going alone? Is that Solo? What Solo
No,
is?
Solo is a character who's focusing on advanced cyberware that gives him more powerful options when it comes to the melee, to the shooting. And this is just an idea. If you look back at the basic rulebook, we are basing those archetypes on Cyberpunk 2020 rulebook.
Generally speaking, like how much can you rely on your friends to help you in those situations?
Yeah, when it comes to relying on your friends, yeah, of course, NPCs will be an important part of storytelling development. Based on those relationships, you'll have a different consequences of those choices.
Depending on who you have as your friends helping you, are some more lethal than others?
I can't speak about the variety without any going into too much spoiler territory, but yeah, the variety with your relationship with those NPCs definitely will be big. Yeah.
The premise of the whole thing with the mega corporations and the gangs on the streets and stuff like that. Obviously that's been around a long time, since the board game, but it's sort of very still relevant today, and probably one could argue the idea of mega corporations and private military contractors is even more relevant today.
When it comes to the themes of Cyberpunk, I cannot imagine more relevant themes than presented in the Cyberpunk game.
Does that offer you an opportunity for social commentary?
I'm not a writer, so I cannot speak as in name of the writer, but I can tell you that when creating work, this kind of work, you're always subjugated to influences which our conscious or subconscious. The stuff, even though the themes presented in Cyberpunk 2020 that were done 20 years ago, even more, and the fact that they're still relevant, it's crazy.
Do you think they were visionaries?
The dystopian vision of the future presented in Cyberpunk 2020 by Mike Pondsmith is getting closer and closer. It's still a work of fiction, but it's crazy. Like the example of the California, thinking about splitting into 3 states. That's just writes himself, right?
Yeah. In most games, when someone goes behind a wall, the player can't see them, and there's a bit of smoke and mirrors. And as a game developer, you're free to pull some tricks.
Part of creating an open world RPG, which is also a first-person game, is actually trying to keep everything working all the time. The game has to be fun, right? And to make it really fun, we're pushing it to make it as diverse when it comes to play styles as possible.
How big is the city?
It's big. It's big, and as I mentioned before, we have verticality now, right? So it's super difficult for us to even compare Witcher with Cyberpunk when it comes to the scope of it. I can tell you, it is going to be a part of a regular playthrough where you are thinking on how to approach each situation.